What if I told you that one of the strangest wars in history started because of an ear? Not over land, not over gold, but a single, severed human ear. This is the unbelievable but true story of the War of Jenkins Ear. A conflict that shows just how weird history can be. Back in the early 1700s, Europe was a battleground for power. Britain and Spain were like two heavyweights, constantly clashing over trade routes and colonies. Spain had a tight grip on the Caribbean and South America, which were incredibly profitable. British merchants, seeing all that money, were desperate to get a piece of the action. Whether it was legal or not, smuggling became a huge business, and you can bet that made the Spanish authorities pretty angry. Tensions were simmering, just waiting for something to make them boil over. That something happened in 1731. A British merchant captain named Robert Jenkins was sailing his ship, the Rebecca, through the Caribbean. He was stopped by the Spanish Coast Guard, who accused him of smuggling and began to search his vessel. Things got heated, and during the confrontation, a Spanish officer, Juan de Leon Fandigo, drew his sword and sliced off Jenkins' ear. According to the story, the officer then told him, "Take this to your king and tell him that I will do the same to him if he dares to do the same." Jenkins, incredibly, survived the ordeal, and he did something truly bizarre. He pickled the ear in a jar and kept it. Fast forward 7 years to 1738. The political atmosphere between Britain and Spain was worse than ever. A group of British politicians who wanted war saw their chance. They brought Robert Jenkins to speak before the British Parliament. In what must have been an incredibly dramatic moment, Jenkins stood before the politicians and, according to legend, unveiled his shriveled, preserved ear. He recounted the tale of his brutal encounter, and the story ignited a firestorm. Newspapers ran with it, public outrage exploded, and the war-hungry politicians had the perfect excuse. They framed the incident as a national humiliation, an insult that Britain could not ignore. The pressure was immense, and in 1739, Prime Minister Robert Walpole reluctantly declared war on Spain. And so began the conflict officially known as the War of Jenkins Ear. Most of the fighting wasn't in Europe, but in the colonies. It was a war of naval battles and amphibious assaults, fought across the Caribbean, Central America, and along the coasts of modern-day Colombia and Florida. But for all its dramatic beginnings, the war itself was largely a stalemate. The British launched a massive attack on the Spanish port of Cartagena de Indias, but it ended in a disastrous defeat. No major territories really changed hands, and both sides suffered heavy losses, mostly from disease. Eventually, the strange little war over an ear was overshadowed and absorbed into a much larger, continent-wide conflict known as the War of the Austrian Succession. So, what's the takeaway? The War of Jenkins Ear is a perfect reminder that history isn't always driven by grand, logical plans. Sometimes, a single, symbolic moment, even something as small and strange as a pickled ear, can be the spark that ignites a global conflict. It shows how emotion, pride, and political opportunism can steer nations into war, and that is why it remains one of the most peculiar chapters in all of human history. Thanks for watching. If you found this story as fascinating as I did, hit that like button and subscribe for more weird history. See you next time.